Stories about America to read aloud. Story number 9, The Legend of the Buffalo Sack. But before I read this story, I want to make one other comment about the last story, the one about the wishing well. The little girl said something in it. She said it was a big secret wish that I couldn't even tell my mother and daddy. That is wrong. There should never be anything, any wish, anything that you can't tell your mommy and daddy. Should not have secrets from mommies and daddies. They love you and they want to protect you. Now, story number 9, The Legend of the Buffalo Sack. Many, many moons ago, long before the white man discovered North America, many Indian tribes roamed the grassy western land called the Great Plains. There were no cities then, with stores where people could buy food and clothing and blankets and dishes. Yet in a way there was a store too. One would never know it was a store by looking at it because it looked like a huge herd of brown animals, buffalo or bison. They weren't very pretty creatures. They were dark and shaggy with big humps on their backs. They had red-rimmed eyes and scraggly beards and mean dispositions. But to the Indians of the plains, they were known as the givers of life, for the Indians hunted the buffalo and from them got many of the things that people must have to live. When an Indian brave killed a buffalo, his family ate the meat. From the thick furry hide they made moccasins to wear on their feet and robes to use as blankets on their beds. They could make boats from the hides too. They wove ropes from buffalo hair. They carved needles from the small bones and tools from the large bones. They made cups and knife handles from the horns and hammers from the hoofs. You can see why a herd of buffalo was like a store. In those days, there were so many buffalo on the Great Plains that nobody could count them. Today we think there must have been 60 million, though no one really knows. When they ran, the noise of their hoofs sounded like thunder. When the great herds stood quietly, the plains were black with them as far as the eye could see. Today there are just a few small herds left on special ranges in the west, but in those days there were more buffalo on the plains than people. Where did the big animals come from? Indian children would often ask their elders, and the elders sitting around the campfires at night would tell this story while the children crowded close to listen. Once there was a strange and wicked man who wandered from camp to camp, causing trouble for the people. He had many names, one of which was Wihio. One day Wihio went to a Cheyenne brave who lived alone. Meat was hanging from branches in the lodge, and there were many hides and ropes lying around. Wihio was envious at seeing another man with so fine a lodge and so much to eat. Then Wihio noticed a curious-looking sack hanging from a lodge pole. He wondered what was in it. He decided he would find out. That night, when the young brave went to sleep, Wihio took the sack from the lodge, tied it to his back, and ran away with it. Soon he came to a large lake. It was too big to swim across, so he tried to run around it. All night he ran along the shore of the lake, but the lake seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. Finally, Wihio was so tired that he lay down on the ground to rest, with the sack still tied to his back. Next morning, when Wihio awoke, he was surprised to find that he was not beside the lake at all. He was back in the Cheyenne's lodge, and the sack was hanging from the lodge pole where it belonged. Now Wihio was more curious than ever, for he could see that this was a strange and wonderful sack. Well, he thought, if I cannot take the sack away from the lodge, then I must make the brave go away and leave the sack. After Wihio and the brave had eaten their breakfast of buffalo meat, Wihio asked, "Tell me, my friend, what are you afraid of? I know you are a brave man, but even the bravest man is afraid of something." "Yes," said the brave, "I am afraid of one creature. I am afraid of a goose." Wihio nodded his head wisely. I'm afraid of a goose too, he said. A goose is a dangerous bird. Then Wihio said goodbye to the young Cheyenne and left the lodge. But that night the wily Wihio returned to the lodge in the shape of a goose. He stood beside a tree and hissed and honked like a goose. Inside the lodge the brave heard the goose sounds and was frightened. So the young man ran away, but he took the sack with him. Wihio was angry. He had wanted the brave to leave the sack behind. Wihio began to follow the man's tracks through the forest. At last he found where the brave had lain down to sleep. Again Wihio stood beside a tree, still in the shape of a goose. He made loud goose sounds. Up jumped the brave and in fear ran off again, but still he carried the sack with him. All night Wihio followed the young man, and twice more when the tired Cheyenne lay down to rest. Wihio so frightened him with goose calls that he jumped up and ran, but he always kept his sack. Finally, as morning was breaking, Wihio tried one last time. He hissed and honked like the angriest giant goose, and this time the desperate brave fled in such panic that he left his sack behind. But as he dropped it, he called out, "I can open that sack only 4 times." Then the young Cheyenne ran off through the forest and was never seen again. Wihio turned back to the shape of a man. "Ha!" thought Wihio as he picked up the sack. "Now I shall go back and have that fine lodge for myself, and I shall see what is in this sack." Back in the lodge he untied the sack and opened it. As soon as he had done so, a buffalo ran out, and the heads of other buffalo could be seen crowding toward the mouth of the sack. Quickly Wihio closed and tied the sack. "This is fine," he said. "This is wonderful. This wonderful sack will keep me in food and hides for a long time." He killed the buffalo and feasted on the meat. It lasted for many days. When the meat was gone, Wihio opened the sack and another buffalo ran out. And again he opened the sack, and when he was out of meat, and again. And he forgot to keep count of the buffalo he had killed, and when he had opened the sack for the 4th time, he told himself, "This is 3 times." A 5th time he opened the sack, and the minute he opened it, many buffalo rushed out, and he could not stop them or close the sack. The great beasts came out in such numbers that they trampled and killed Wihio. They kept coming out and coming out. The buffalo ran to the north and to the south and to the east and to the west. They spread out over the plains. And so, the elders concluded as they talked to the children beside the campfires long ago, that is where the buffalo came from. And that was the last ever heard of the wicked Wihio. Of course, that's a legend, that's a story. We know who created the buffalo. God did.